Judge. Venezuela right now is a dead country, so we're going to have the big oil companies go in.
Brent crude is the global benchmark for oil prices. It is trading at around $61. The price has increased by just 0.4% for 1 barrel of oil. Similarly, the West Texas Intermediate has held steady. This is the oil benchmark for American markets. It is trading a few dollars below Brent at around $58 for a barrel. So America's attack on Venezuela has barely moved the oil markets. And I'll tell you why. While Venezuela has the world's highest or largest reserves of oil, when it comes to actual supplies, it's a very small player. It accounts for less than 1% of global supplies. So a crisis in Venezuela has no immediate bearing on global oil supplies. But this story has only begun. And if President Donald Trump has his way, then the oil markets would be the first to feel the impact.
Getting land, oil rights, whatever we had, they took it away because we had a president that maybe wasn't watching. But they're not going to do that. We want it back. They took our oil rights. We had a lot of oil there. As you know, they threw our companies out, and we want it back.
That statement is from December 2025. Before Trump attacked Venezuela, he said Venezuelans, quote-unquote, stole oil from America. So taking Maduro in American custody was just phase 1 of the plan. In phase 2, Trump wants to recover what he calls America's stolen oil.
Venezuela right now is a dead country. We have to bring it back. And we're going to have big investments by the oil companies to bring back the infrastructure. And the oil companies are ready to go.
Trump says he wants to rebuild Venezuela's oil sector and he wants U.S. companies to take charge.
The world braced for an oil shock when news broke that the United States president had ordered a direct strike linked to Venezuela. Traders, analysts, and policymakers all reached for the same mental playbook. Military escalation near a major oil-producing state has historically meant one thing: higher prices, sudden volatility, and panic-driven buying. The expectation was almost automatic. Screens were watched closely. Futures markets were primed. Headlines predicted turbulence. And then, almost nothing happened. Oil prices barely flinched. The surge never came. Within hours, the market had absorbed the news and moved on, leaving behind a deeper question. How could a strike involving one of the world's most oil-rich countries fail to rattle global energy markets? To understand the surprise, it helps to remember why oil markets usually react so violently to conflict. For decades, crude prices have been hypersensitive to geopolitical risk. Wars, sanctions, blockades, or even threats near key production zones have tended to trigger fears of supply disruptions. Oil is not just a commodity. It is a strategic asset that underpins transportation, industry, and national security. When supply appears threatened, traders rush to price and scarcity, often pushing prices higher well before actual barrels are lost. That logic, however, no longer applies in the same way it once did. The calm response to the Venezuela strike revealed how dramatically the structure of the global oil market has changed, and how much geopolitical power has quietly shifted away from Washington. The first and most important factor is Venezuela's diminished role in global supply. While the country sits atop some of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, years of mismanagement, underinvestment, and sanctions have hollowed out its production capacity. Output today is a fraction of what it was at its peak. Much of the infrastructure is aging, refineries are operating well below capacity, and export volumes are already constrained. In practical terms, this means there was little oil left to lose. Markets did not fear a sudden disappearance of Venezuelan barrels because those barrels were never fully present in the first place. For traders, the strike did not threaten the marginal supply that actually determines prices. Second, sanctions had already done most of the work. For years, Venezuela's oil sector has operated under heavy restrictions. Buyers, insurers, and shipping companies have adapted to a reality in which Venezuelan crude is limited, discounted, and rerouted through complex channels. This environment was already priced into the market long before the strike occurred. When geopolitical risk is known and persistent, it loses its power to shock. The strike did not introduce a new constraint. It reinforced an old one. From the market's perspective, nothing fundamentally changed. Third, OPEC's spare capacity acted as a powerful stabilizer. Major producers, particularly in the Middle East, currently hold the ability to increase output if prices rise sharply. This buffer has become one of the most important anchors in today's oil market. Traders understand that any sudden spike driven by fear would likely be met with additional supply, capping price gains. Beyond OPEC, alternative suppliers have grown more flexible. Energy flows have become more diversified, shipping routes more adaptable, and storage more abundant. The market is less brittle than it once was, better able to absorb regional shocks without cascading into global disruption. Demand conditions also played a critical role. Global oil consumption is no longer accelerating at the pace it once did. Economic uncertainty, tight monetary policy, and uneven growth across major economies have softened demand expectations. In such an environment, fear-driven rallies struggle to gain traction. Traders are far less willing to bet on sustained price spikes when consumption growth looks fragile. Simply put, this was not a market hungry for excuses to run higher. There was also the issue of anticipation. The strike did not arrive out of nowhere. Diplomatic tensions had been building, warnings had been issued, and analysts had openly discussed the possibility of escalation. By the time the strike occurred, much of the speculative positioning had already been adjusted. When an event is widely expected, it loses its ability to surprise. In trading terms, the story had already been sold. On Wall Street and across energy trading desks, the interpretation was blunt. This was seen less as a disruptive military action and more as a symbolic gesture. Hedge funds and institutional investors did not see tankers being halted, pipelines being shut, or export terminals going dark. They saw signaling, not supply loss. Risk models reflected that assessment. Volatility indicators remained subdued. Options markets showed little sign of panic hedging. The strike was analyzed, contextualized, and ultimately discounted. This reaction says less about Venezuela and more about America's changing position in global energy markets. For decades, Washington wielded enormous influence over oil prices through military presence, sanctions, and diplomatic pressure. Today, that leverage is weaker, not because power has vanished, but because the system has evolved. Energy flows are increasingly shaped by multipolar dynamics. China has expanded its role as both a major consumer and a strategic broker of energy relationships. Russia remains a key supplier, especially outside Western-aligned markets. Long-term contracts, bilateral agreements, and regional trade frameworks now play a larger role than public threats or sudden strikes. At the same time, non-dollar oil trade has quietly expanded. More transactions are being settled outside traditional financial channels, reducing the immediate market impact of political actions tied to sanctions or currency pressure. This does not eliminate risk, but it changes how that risk is transmitted and how quickly it is absorbed. The Venezuela strike unfolded against this backdrop. It was not ignored, but it was contextualized within a world where oil power is no longer centralized and where markets respond more to fundamentals than to symbolism. The broader message is unsettling for those who still view energy dominance through a Cold War lens. Military action alone no longer guarantees economic shockwaves. Control over oil markets now depends on spare capacity, demand growth, financial architecture, and geopolitical alignment, not just force. In the end, the lack of an oil spike was not a sign of stability. It was a signal of transition. The strike was expected to demonstrate strength, to remind markets of America's reach and resolve. Instead, it exposed a new reality. Global energy markets have learned how to look past the noise. They respond to barrels, not headlines. To flows, not gestures. That is the real takeaway. Not that oil is immune to conflict, but that the rules governing its reaction have changed. And for Washington, the calm market response may be the clearest warning, yet that influence in the energy world is no longer what it used to be.